Have you ever had trouble waking up in the morning? This time of year is the worst. It's cold and it's dark. Cold and dark. In fact, waking up in the morning is one of the great challenges in life. In his song, Asleep in the Light, Keith Green put it this way: Jesus rose from the dead, but you can't even get out of bed. Now, so imagine this. I got my pillow here, got my alarm clock. So imagine me, I'm in my bed, I'm super cozy and warm. My room is dark, pitch black. It's cold, I can feel the cold air on my face, those couple of spots on my shoulders that are sticking out of the covers. But inside those covers, oh man, how do I feel? Oh, and it's time for me to wake up, and I am desperately trying to stay asleep. Outside, it is pouring buckets of rain, and that sound is calling me back to sleep. Please stay in bed. I know that it's time to wake up. My alarm clock goes off. Plays, well, I use my phone, but this is a good visual, right? It's not on. My alarm clock goes off. Burn the Ships by For King and Country. I wake up to that every single day. But I hit the snooze button. Don't judge me. It's just 5 more minutes. It doesn't matter, right? But I know in that moment, I know that I need to get up. I know that if I get up right then, my morning is going to be great. If I get up right then, I'm going to be able to pray. I'm going to be able to sip my coffee in peace. I'm going to be able to wake my family up. They are depending on me. No one gets up in my house until I turn on the lights and bring the coffee. No one. They're depending on me. In fact, as I get up consistently, I am modeling something for my children that will reverberate generations into the future. In fact, the whole future history of my descendants is depending on me getting out of bed at that moment. And in the darkness, I don't care. I am willing to wreck my whole day, wreck my whole family, wreck the whole future history of my lineage, just to hit the snooze button a couple more times. In that moment, I am trapped. I am a slave to the darkness, and I desperately need someone to turn on the lights for me. Amen? Let's get rid of this pillow. We are at the end of a series of messages right now, going through Advent. That's the time leading up to Christmas. It's called the Arrival. Advent simply means the arrival. And as we've gone through this series, we've been looking at prophecy. Prophecies of the promised one. We looked at prophecies right from the beginning, that someone would come, even right after human beings had messed everything up. We looked at the prophecies around his birth, how those were, it didn't seem like they could all be fulfilled by one person, and yet they were. And we looked at prophecies around his suffering, that this one who was coming into the world was not just going to be born and live a happy life, but he would suffer and die. But the result of that would be great joy. Let's remember a couple of our main points as we've gone through this series. Oh yeah, there's my bed. Sad story. One of the main things that we looked at, what does it mean when we think about the fact that God prophesied? He sent messages to human beings long before Jesus ever came. He predicted exactly what would happen so that when it happened, we knew that it was from God. What does that tell us, and what can we take out of it? One of the things that it tells us is that even in despair, we need to remember that God knew ahead of time. In your darkest moments, when something really bad happens to you, And you think, why is this happening to me? Maybe like the story we heard earlier. Why is this happening to me? Why did God allow me to have cancer? Or why did he allow this awful thing, whatever else it is, to come into my life? We may not have the answer to that, but we do know that he knew about it ahead of time. And he already has a plan that if we will cling to him and follow him, he's going to turn it around. He's going to use it in the end for our good if we will trust him. Even in despair, remember that God knew ahead of time. The other big point that we've been thinking about during this message series is this. Don't listen to all the voices. Pay attention to the one voice. That's been our theme for the Christmas season. Christmas is a good illustration of life in general. There are all kinds of voices out there, aren't there? Trying to tell you, no, this is what life is like. Just do this and you'll be okay. No, this is what life is like. Just do this and you'll be okay. No. It's all hype. It's not real. There's only one voice that leads to life. And we got to block out all those other voices from getting a grip on us. And we got to listen to the one voice. And we've been saying, what is your plan this Christmas season to pay attention to the one voice? And I hope that many of you have put something into practice, whether that was, doing a devotional at home, maybe with your family or on your own, adding a prayer time, some kind of practice that we've encouraged you to do in order to pay attention to the one voice and block out the others this Christmas season. Today, what we're going to do, this is our final message in the series, and we are going to look at prophecies of the victory of the Messiah. The promised one who was going to come into the world would be born in a special way. He would suffer and die. By his suffering and death, he would bring great joy into the world. And then he would win. He would conquer. He would defeat everything bad, even death itself. We're going to look at two of those prophecies today in Isaiah chapter 61, where Isaiah prophesies that the Messiah will heal and he will set free. And we're going to look at another one from Isaiah 9, which is my favorite prophetic passage for Christmas. It's my favorite one. It's amazing. We've looked at pieces of it so far in this series. We're going to look at Isaiah 9, and that's going to be this image of light versus darkness. Light and darkness. But first, a word about Isaiah. Why should we listen to this guy, Isaiah? He's prophesying here in these two passages we're going to look at. He's prophesying about what is true now and what will happen in the future. So what is true now and what will happen in the future? He's saying that this great victory that was to come through the Messiah, this one that God promised, Jesus, who was born 2,000 years ago, this great victory is available to us now. And one day it will come in fullness. Why should we believe that that's true? What credit does Isaiah have? We talked about a couple of weeks ago the credit that Isaiah had in the early days, right after when he was alive and right afterwards. The credit that he had then was that he had actually been able to, trusting God, along with a king of Israel, or king of Judah named Hezekiah, he had been able to, in the face of a huge army that had come against his kingdom, this kingdom of Judah, a huge army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers that they couldn't possibly defeat, he had been able to trust God, that God would defeat that army himself. And so by God's power, Isaiah and Hezekiah had defeated this huge enemy army. It was amazing. That's the credit that he had then. But today, Isaiah has even more credit because he prophesied things. He told things that would happen ahead of time that are absolutely astonishing. We looked at this a little bit last week, but let's take a look for a moment at Isaiah chapter 53. This is Isaiah chapter 53, verses 4 to 5. Let me read it for you. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Now, who is he talking about here? This is a section in the book of Isaiah, this prophet who lived about 700 years before Christ. A section where he is talking about the Messiah, the one who is going to come. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. You may have heard this section before. Here he is prophesying way before it happened exactly what the Messiah would do. Something that no one expected, even when it happened, even with this prophecy. He was predicting that the Messiah would be pierced. He would have wounds. He would suffer, and in this passage he also says die, so that human beings could be healed, so our sins could be forgiven. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. In this passage, Isaiah says not only these things, but specific details about what would happen to the Messiah. He says things like, he would be killed with criminals. Jesus was crucified between two robbers. He says that he would be buried with rich people. Jesus was buried in a tomb that was cut out of rock that only the rich could afford in those days. He was given that place of burial by someone who was a high official in the government of Judea. He says that the Messiah, when he's on trial, would not speak, but that he would be silent. Isaiah says in this passage that the Messiah, people would cast lots for his clothing. He says over and over different pieces that are specific and could only have happened and only did happen to Jesus himself. He says them way before they ever happened, specific details about Jesus' life. In fact, this passage in Isaiah 53 predicted so many details about Jesus' life that starting in about the 1600s, professors and scholars in Europe started saying, this must have been written after Jesus. This predicts his life in such detail, it could not possibly have been written before Jesus was around. It must have been written afterwards. And then do you know what happened? You probably heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? In the 1950s, this came to light that there was actually a copy of the book of Isaiah. It's called the Great Isaiah Scroll, and the very paper is 100 years older than Jesus. So for something like 350 years, scholars were saying this Isaiah had to have been written after Jesus because it predicts him too accurately. It's impossible it was written beforehand. And then they found a copy of it from before he was born. Oops. Here is why Isaiah should have huge credit for us today. He predicted incredible detail about Jesus' life way before it ever happened. So whatever else he says, we should pay attention to it. We should listen to it. So let's jump into the next section then. We're going to look at Isaiah 61, and then we're going to look at Isaiah 9. So Isaiah 61 is about this. It's about freedom for the captives. And this passage is actually one that Jesus said was about him. He was in his hometown, the town of Nazareth, and he was just beginning his ministry, all the amazing things that he did. And he was in church, what they called synagogue. And when he got up, he was a reader in church, like sometimes people come up and read scripture in our church, read parts of the Bible. That's what he did in his church. And he was given this particular part of the book of Isaiah. And he read it, and at the end he said, this part is about me. Well, he didn't quite say that, but he said, this scripture, this prophecy is fulfilled in your presence. It's about me, and it's happening right now. So let's see what it says here. Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn. The Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me. Here we are clearly told that when this one comes, this one who was promised for so long, who came on what we celebrate as Christmas Day, this one would not only be born in a special way, he would not only suffer and by his suffering set us free, but he would win the victory. He would set the captives free and bring good news to the poor and to the brokenhearted. He would have the ability to both heal us and set us free from the darkness. We'll be talking more about darkness when we get to the Isaiah 9 passage. But just think about that image we had at the beginning. Pastor Isaac, slave to the darkness under his blankets. Now that's a metaphor for life. We are slaves to the darkness until we are brought into the light. And he has the ability to bring us into the light. That's what Isaiah is telling us here. And he wants to do it. It's what God has sent him to do. He's given him the power. That's what anointed means. He's poured out his Spirit onto this one person to such a degree that this one person is actually able to set us free from the darkness. Whatever that thing is in your life that is the great darkness, the thing that controls you, the thing that holds you, the thing you've struggled against and failed, he is able to heal you and set you free. Do you believe it? The next point for your notes is this. He wants to heal you and set you free. He wants to heal you and set you free. The question is, how are you going to respond? We're going to jump from there into Isaiah chapter 9. God reigns over the chaos of life. God reigns over all the noise. Isaiah chapter 9. This is my favorite. Light in the darkness. And here we're going to develop a little bit more this metaphor, which is true to life. There is light, there is darkness. Jesus is the light that has come into the world. The world, life, is actually darkness. That's another thing we can take away just from this last section that we just looked at, Isaiah 61. Our natural condition. Sometimes we think, oh, we're kind of okay in life. But no. The natural condition of human beings is trapped, is bound in darkness. We are not able to get ourselves out of it. Sometimes, like it is when I'm asleep or trying to stay asleep, I think that I'm okay there in bed. I think that that's the good place for me to be, but I'm wrong. When the lights come on, when it's daytime, I know that I need to get out of that. Do you see the analogy here? I know that I need to get out of that when I'm in the light, when my mind is clear. I decide I must get up at a certain time each day. That's essential to my life. But in the darkness, it feels like a dream. Reality feels like a dream, and the dream world feels real. That's the condition of human beings much of the time. Actually, all of the time until the light comes into our lives and we are set free. Our blindness is healed by Jesus. Light in the darkness. Okay, let's look at Isaiah chapter 9. The point here is going to be this. Embrace the light and experience great joy. Actually, I don't think this one is on the screen. Why don't you grab your notes and flip over onto the other side, and you're going to find Isaiah chapter 9 on the back side of your notes. You can get there while I turn there. This is my favorite Christmas passage. How many of you are with me? How many of you like this one? Okay. Let's read it. I'm going to read quite a lot here. I'm not sure if all of it is on your notes there. It might all be there. We're going to read quite a lot. Verses 1 all the way down through verse 7. We've read pieces of this in the series leading up to this. This is the idea that the Messiah would come as a great light in the darkness. He would win an amazing victory. He would defeat all of his enemies, and this would bring great joy. This would bring victory, joy, and peace for those who are with him, for the people of the light. We heard some of this earlier. Chapter 9, verse 1. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. Remember, we talked about that's the region that Jesus grew up in. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them. A yoke is an instrument of slavery, of control. The bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Now here's the enemies being defeated. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Okay, let's go through this passage a little bit and pick out what is Isaiah telling us here about this great one who was going to come. He tells us a number of things. The first thing is that those who were in distress, those who felt like their lives were awful and they were trapped and they couldn't get out of it, when this Messiah comes, he will be able to turn that around. That's the same thing we just saw in Isaiah 61. He's going to be able to set the captives free. He's going to be able to fix everything. The next piece that we see, and this is important, is that the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And that is a vivid image. The people are in darkness and this light appears. We'll go into, in a minute, exactly what the dynamics are there, because it's not always just great for everyone. If you are in pitch darkness and someone turns on a bright light, how do you usually respond to that? You don't say, "Oh, thank you, that was wonderful." If you're in the darkness like I was in my bed under my covers and you don't want to get up, and your husband comes in and turns on the lights, or your dad comes in and turns on the lights, how do you respond? We'll come back to that in a minute. So it's a good thing, but it doesn't always feel great. So the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. He repeats it. They're living in a land of deep darkness. This is the condition of the world all the time, but a light has dawned. It's begun to rise. The next piece that we look at is he's saying in those next couple of verses, in verse 3 and verse 4, he's saying that the enemies, the people who are on this person's side, the people who are following the Messiah, who are with him, they are going to have great joy. It's going to be like all their hopes and dreams are now fulfilled. It's now happening. But the people who are enemies of the Messiah, who have been fighting against him, everything that they have had is going to be destroyed. So we saw this a number of times in the prophecies in previous weeks about the Messiah, that he would divide the world into two teams. You're either with him or you're not with him. Now, that doesn't mean that he's against anyone. He loves us and wants everyone to be with him. But he will accomplish a great victory. And he is scary. The light in the darkness is a powerful thing. After that, we see the section that's normally read at Christmas, for unto us a child is born, a son is given. So he's born, and he will, from birth, be the one who rules and is in control. He will establish a government. The government will be on his shoulders. So what Isaiah is telling us here is something very important. He is telling us, because we live in the time Jesus has already come, he is telling us that Jesus already rules the world. Do you see it? His government has already begun, and his government will only increase. It will never decrease. It will never cease to exist. It will only increase throughout the rest of history. And we see, in fact, that this has been happening since the time of Jesus' birth and his ministry. That his government, the people who want to follow him, that number has only been increasing. The influence that he has had on the world as a whole has only increased. His government and his oversight of the world has only increased throughout history since his time on earth. It also means that there are no governments who are really in control right now. For this time, God still allows people to choose their own way. But over top of all of that, he is in control. He is so great and so powerful that he can allow rulers of governments, individual human beings, to pick different things. They can choose the wrong thing. They can choose to do awful things. And yet he can still accomplish his will, what he decides will happen despite it all. He is that great. He rules over the flood, over the chaos of this world. We see a few names of him here. This Messiah who would come would be our counselor. He would give us the very best teaching. He would be God himself, and not just God, but God in power. He would be the everlasting Father, because he's ready to adopt us into his family. He's not some distant, angry God. He's not some God who just requires a bunch of things of us. He is a loving Father who wants nothing more. The thing he wants most of all is that we would turn to him and he would be able to bring us back to the place we were always meant to be. The greatness of his government and peace will have no end. Okay, let's come back to this theme of light and darkness. Some of you will know these verses from the Gospel of John, which is another book in the Bible. They're not on the screen. I'm just going to tell you about them. The first one, in the first chapter of the book of John, we are told that Jesus was the light in the darkness. Light has come into the world. The one who would be the great light has come into the world. And then John says, and the darkness has not understood or overcome it. He actually uses a play on words in the original language here, a word that means both understood and overcome. So light has come into the world. A great light has come into the darkness of this world. The darkness, two things. The darkness has not understood it. Just like when you wake up in the morning, that light first comes on, you don't understand why it would possibly ever go on. Just let me sleep. The darkness does not understand the light, but the darkness can never overcome the light. Here's the thing about darkness and light. It's such a vivid image because What happens to the darkness in a room when you turn on the lights? What happens to it? Does the darkness fight against the light? Is there like a moment where the light and the darkness are kind of evenly in the room, battling against each other because they're of equal power? No. When you turn on a light, the darkness is simply gone. There is no time that it takes. The only places any darkness is left is in little shadows behind things and in the corners. The darkness in the room is simply gone as soon as the light is turned on. This is an illustration of the great power that Jesus brings into the world and into our lives. But the great question is how we will respond. Yo, check this out. Okay, so second story about waking up in the morning. This one is about my kids. I have 4 children. I can still tell stories about 2 of them because they're young enough to not be in this room during the message. Andrew and Nathan, 9 and 6, I wake them up every day for school. And now this is not going to be unusual. If you're a parent, you know this experience. If you've ever been a child who was in school, you know this experience from the other side. So, I walk into the room. The room is darkness. They are sleeping so nice, peacefully, quietly. And I, with no mercy or love in my heart, flip on the brightest lights in the room all at once. And immediately, what do? We've already talked about this. What do? They go, "Oh, no, Dad, no. Oh, why does it have to be school? Oh, school is awful. I don't want to get up. I want to stay asleep." Now, here's the thing. That's how they feel when the light first hits them in the middle of the darkness. But they are kids, and they are very resilient, and they change their moods and focus really fast. What are they like 1 minute later? They're like this. 1 minute later, after they've been in the light for just 1 minute, their perspective has entirely changed. 1 minute later, Nathan's going, "I love school. Oh, yeah, Dad, do this with me. Oh, I'm going to hit my brother with a pillow. Let's wrestle. Let's go get some breakfast." Andrew jumps up out of bed. Actually, Andrew transitions in about 4 seconds. It's amazing. He goes from darkness, I don't want to get out of bed. I can sit there and watch. I should start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boom, he literally jumps up, jumps off the bed, and runs down the stairs to get his breakfast because now he's motivated by what? Cereal. Everybody loves cereal, right? Now, here's the point. Here's the point. The darkness traps us. In the darkness, we don't see reality the way it is. In that moment in the darkness, we feel like that's the place I should be. I should stay asleep. I should not be awake doing all these other things. This is just like human beings when we're stuck in our own stuff and resisting God. It looks like God is this awful bully. I don't want him in my life at all. I want to pretend like he's not real. He would wreck my life if he came into my life. The only reason it seems like that is because the lights are off. It's a lie. As soon as the lights come on, not instantly, but if you sit in that light for 5 minutes, you're going to wake up, you're going to realize what's true about the world, and you're going to go, the light is where I'm supposed to be, not the darkness. The light is the best thing. Why was I trapped in the darkness? Why did I want to stay there? I can go have cereal, Fruit Loops, baby. Whatever your pick is. I am a Raisin Bran guy myself. But once you're in the light for 5 minutes, everything looks different. You see life as it really is. Jesus is that light. His enemies are defeated. He already rules the world. Let me go back to this. This was the point I wanted to get to. Embrace the light and experience great joy. Just like when you're sleeping in bed, you want to resist it. But what you should do is embrace it. Sit in that light for a few minutes. allow Jesus to wake you up from your bondage, from all your garbage that you're that you stuck in. He is able to heal you and set you free. And when you've been in the light for just a few minutes, you're going to realize that it is the place you were made for. He is going to bring, and he's going to give you cereal. He's going to give you a great day at school. Now, we're just using the kids' analogy here. He's going to give you a great day at school. He's going to give you wonderful things in your life. You're going to be able to go and do what you were made to do, your work. But you have to accept and embrace that light. Embrace the light, even though it hurts your eyes at first, and you will experience great joy. His enemies are defeated. This is the last point for your notes. They are already defeated. We saw that in Isaiah 9. He already rules the world. He already does. I want to leave you with two thoughts, two ways that you could put into practice what you've heard today. If you say, hey, I want to embrace the light. I want to live with the cereal and excitement and great joy. I don't want to live in the darkness. What could you do right now, right after you leave here? This Christmas, what could you do to experience that? Two things I'll leave you with. Number one, worship is the center of Christmas. So make it the center. We've talked about this in different words throughout this series of messages. Worship is the center of Christmas. Christmas is not about a bunch of gifts or just a bunch of busyness or all those other voices that are out there. It's not even primarily about family. Though don't hear me saying you shouldn't get together with your family. You should get together with your family. It's primarily about focusing ourselves on the true God. Focusing ourselves on His light. Trusting Him. Paying attention to the light. That's what it's about. So do it. You're already doing it. I'm preaching to the choir. If you're at home, come here and do it with us. Come on Christmas Eve. Do things, continue to do things to make that a priority during this season and during your whole life. Second thing, bring the light into the darkness. What do I mean? You're going to do a lot of things over Christmas. I don't know what your traditions are. Maybe you've already done a bunch of them. You probably have a bunch coming up. Whatever things you're doing, recognize that the world that you're walking through is bound in darkness. It is a land of deep darkness. You, if you are a follower of Jesus, you have the ability to bring the light into that world. So pick something. It's not all that hard because God does the work. Last year, I'll tell you what I did. I was with extended family, many of whom are not Christians, and I decided in this group of a whole bunch of people, this might sound strange to you that this was scary to me. It was a group of about maybe 20, 25, and I asked them if I could lead them all in a devotional, read them all some of the Bible, and talk about it for a minute and sing a song. Now, I do this all the time here, but with my extended family, that was very scary for me. I had never done that before, not to the degree that I did it last year. And actually, the whole time that I did it, I was nervous. But I also watched God bring the light into the darkness. I watched it happen. I don't know what God might lead you to do in your times, in your traditions, in your busyness over the next several days, over the next couple of weeks. But think about it. Pray about it. Ask Him what He might lead you to do. And be bold enough to bring the light into the darkness. Let's pray, and we'll continue in worship.